Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 5 of Strategic Planning and Leadership. Our theme this week is an introduction to adaptive strategy. We're taking a 1 week break from the Good Strategy, Bad Strategy book, and we have a couple of other readings that I hope you find interesting. One of those is a chapter out of Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late. That's a chapter entitled, What the Hell Happened in 2007? And then the other article that I have this week for required reading is Holly Green's article entitled Shifting from Strategic Planning to Strategic Agility. We have a couple of other things going on this week beyond the readings. We do have another one of our online discussions. This will be over last week's material and this week's material. Ben, Carrie, and Kat are going to be our discussion leaders this week. If you didn't notice, for last week, week 4, I did include a discussion board asking for feedback about the first discussion forum. I was just interested in how we could improve that, what your reactions were to that. And so if you haven't posted in that, I encourage you to do that, give us some feedback. And then Ben, Carrie, and Kat, I encourage you to take a look at those comments and just consider how you might bring those into this week's discussion. The other thing that we have on our agenda for this week is you have your first writing assignment due. That's your design brief that is due on September 30th. You should be able to submit that online through Moodle. If you have any problems with that, please let me know. So just a few words about each of our readings this week. The reading from Friedman's book, What the Hell Happened in 2007. This is a book. I would encourage you to read this, and I would encourage you to read these types of books that try to provide a kind of global perspective on what's going on. I think it's really critical for organizational leaders to see the big picture of what's going on. What are the forces that are driving the world, shaping how our organizations operate, affecting human behavior. In general, I think it's really important for organizational leaders to understand human behavior. And so one of the things I will do as we go along in the semester is I'll continue to provide some readings that you might consider either during the semester or beyond. So Friedman talks about 3 things that are driving this acceleration: technology, globalization, and climate change. And he talks about the fact that all 3 of these things are accelerating simultaneously. And he says, as a result, so many aspects of our societies, workplaces, and geopolitics are being reshaped and need to be reimagined. I included this graphic, I think, in an earlier lecture this semester. This was done by Astro Teller, who's at Google. And it really, this is the seminal challenge that is facing organizational leaders going forward. Change is now outpacing our ability to adapt, both as individuals and as organizations. And so think about this, how does this impact the work of government agencies, of nonprofit organizations? As you are preparing to work on your projects, consider how this impacts strategic processes and how it impacts organizational culture. I like this quote from Teller. We can either push back against technological advances, or we can acknowledge that humanity has a new challenge. We must rewire our societal tools and institutions so that they will enable us to keep pace. So as you've started to see through Rummelt and through some of the things I have talked about, traditional strategic planning was built on this assumption that the world is reasonably stable and predictable. And the reality is that is no longer the case. So over the next few weeks, we're going to explore how organizations can rewire their approach to strategy, to strategic planning, And also, as we get a little bit further into the semester, we'll talk about how we actually rewire our organizations in general, the structures and the culture within our organizations. So the other reading this week is this article, Shifting from Strategic Planning to Strategic Agility. And so I just wanted to do a little bit of a comparison between strategic planning and strategic agility, what that difference looks like. And so one of the things that the author talks about is that strategic planning typically is very logical, linear, step by step. Rummelt talks about this as the template-driven strategic planning. And so what we're talking about in strategic agility or strategic thinking or adaptive strategy is that this process becomes much more creative, intuitive. You start thinking outside of kind of the typical process and the typical boxes that we've used. Traditional strategic planning has relied heavily on analysis. So analysis is breaking down problems into smaller parts so you can understand those, make sense out of those. When we move to strategic agility, we add in, we still do the analysis, but it's also important to add in synthesis to that. So what is synthesis? That's really about combining multiple sources or ideas into a whole. It's starting to see the dots, see new patterns, and how we connect those differently. It's about innovation in reality. Traditional strategic planning is typically, an organization makes a decision at some point that we need to create a strategic plan, or we need to renew our strategic plan. And so you go through a process. That process has a beginning, it has an end. And then you live with that plan for a certain time period, whether that's 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. In the new model, strategic planning, strategic thinking never really ends. It really just becomes part of your day-to-day operation within your organization. It's how you conduct business. It becomes part of your culture. And then finally, typically strategic planning has been done by organizational leaders. This article talks about strategic thinking now becoming something that's practiced by employees at all levels of the organization. And it also engages people not only within the organization but outside of the organization, all of your stakeholders that are involved, whether that's your clients, your customers, other people who might be able to contribute to creative thinking. So, I threw this up there. I know you've probably had an understanding about sort of how our brain works. That our left brain really talks about, or really works in the realm of analytic thinking. As you can see in this graphic, it has the word strategic in there, reason, those types of things. One of the things that I think is a reality now is that strategic planning or strategy in the age of accelerations needs to move out. It requires more than just left brain activity. It requires what you might call whole brain. It requires bringing in this right brain creativity and innovation. So we will talk throughout the semester about individually how we as leaders develop some of that right brain thinking, right brain skill sets. But I also think that it's important to understand that you can bring that into an organization collectively. And it's critical, I think, to, as you're doing strategy, include a lot of different perspectives, include people who might think differently, who might be outside of the traditional disciplines that you're involved in. I know working at the University of Montana, that's been a big theme that we've talked about is, it's critical for us to teach students in a cross-disciplinary way. And so they're making those connections and developing sort of that whole brain thinking capability. So that's it for the week, for this lecture. Again, you've got discussion board, you've got a writing assignment due. Um, Reach out to me if you have questions or issues. But I wish you the best of luck this week, and we will talk soon. Thank you.